Thomas Wolsey's rise to power was significant. He elevated himself from a poor family background to a point he was known as the Alter Rex, or the Other King. He was a man with great abilities. He succeeded where others failed, and his diplomatic missions were often arduous, yet he continued to break new ground. So what was Henry's opinion of his statesman, and which indiscretion did Thomas fail that brought about his downfall? Join me now as we look at the life of Thomas Wolsey. Thomas Wolsey was born about 1473. He was the son of Robert Wolsey of Ipswich and his wife Joan Daundy. It's been said his father was a butcher, which would become a bone of contention in his later years when he started to gain power and increase his wealth. It wasn't a background looked upon as anything special by his critics of the day, and many scoffed at the idea that this man should warrant such attention. Wolsey's education was pretty good, starting out at Ipswich School before moving to Oxford, where he would study theology at Magdalen College. Over the following years his prominence rose, and he was ordained as a priest in Wiltshire. By 1502 he had entered service with Henry VIII, the Archbishop of Canterbury, but when Henry died later the following year, he began to work for Sir Richard Nanfan, where Wolsey was made executor of the estate. It would be after Nanfan's death that Wolsey's pedigree would once again rise up, for now his new master was King Henry VII. Luckily for Wolsey, the king had a soft spot for, well, let's say, people from a more modest background. He was appointed as royal chaplain and also served as secretary to Richard Fox. Wolsey was a man with great dedication to his roles. He was industrious and always willing to partake in the more laborious work offered to him. But it was his overall intelligence and brilliant work ethic that enabled his remarkable climb to power. It was also the king that had noticed something special in Wolsey, something he'd not previously witnessed. Henry sent Wolsey to Scotland in April 1508 to speak with King James IV about rumours to renew the Old Alliance. This was created in 1295 between the kingdoms of Scotland and France for the purpose of controlling England's numerous invasions. With his mission accomplished, Wolsey would continue to steer his career in the right direction, a rise that would coincide with the succession of Henry VIII. Henry, though, was a different kettle of fish to his father, and Wolsey would quickly come to realise this. Although Henry was only 18, he already exerted power and influence, one in which Wolsey was well aware of, and one which would help seal his great friendship with the new king. Henry inherited counsellors from his father, one being Richard Fox, the Bishop of Winchester, and the other William Warham, the Archbishop of Canterbury. These men were both cautious in their approach as to how Henry should proceed, but it would be Henry who would lay down his gauntlet and seek men that only had an affinity with his way of thinking. Wolsey had always been anti-war, however, under Henry he soon changed his tune. The king had a plan to invade France, and it would be up to Wolsey to persuade the privy councillors of his intentions. But both Warham and Fox disagreed with the king's passion for the French war, and inevitably both fell from power. It would be now that Wolsey who held the reins and became the king's most loyal and trusted advisor. Wolsey now made careful steps to either destroy or nullify Henry's courtiers. It would be the fall of Sir Edward Stafford, the 3rd Duke of Buckingham, that set out his and the king's intentions. Others also suffered under his control, one being William Compton, one of Henry's friends, and Anne Stafford, an ex-mistress of the king. However, the biggest crisis happened with Charles Brandon. You could say this gave Wolsey a bit of a headache. After Charles had married Henry's sister, Mary Tudor, without consent from the king, Wolsey had to think long and hard at how the issue may be resolved, and although this was a treasonous act, Wolsey came to the conclusion that death for the couple would not be the solution. Luckily for all parties, Henry agreed, and life at court moved on. Over the coming years, Wolsey became more powerful, his status growing not only within court, but also around the country and across Europe. By 1515, Pope Leo X had made him a cardinal. Wolsey had always been vigilant with his work, and this was obvious to everyone who knew him. And now his talents would once again come to the fore. The Anglo-French War gave him a further opportunity to establish his expertise with foreign policy. A cry for help from Pope Julius II, who at the time felt threatened by the possibility of an attack from France. But Wolsey came to the rescue. He had secured an alliance between King Ferdinand V of Spain and Maximilian I, Holy Roman Emperor, and the Allies would now battle it out with King Louis XII of France. Henry was excited to get started after his chief advisor had what he thought secured a great treaty. However, the first attack failed. This was mainly due to Ferdinand being unreliable. But not to worry, Henry was not beaten, and once again in 1513, with lessons learnt and still with papal support, they launched a joint attack on France with Maximilian, on this occasion capturing 2 French cities and causing the French to retreat. It was Wolsey who had gained the most from all of this. He managed the logistics in keeping the troops both supplied and well equipped. Ultimately, this would provide a winning game plan and create an Anglo-French peace treaty in August 1514 that would calm things down for at least a short period of time. It also allowed England to keep the captured city of Tournai and secure extra funds from France via annual pension payments. But more turbulent times lay ahead, and there was to be another shift in the European houses of power. This all threatened to dim Henry's light and, more importantly, his influence. But after the death of Louis XII, it would be Francis I who came to power. Wolsey then proposed a second alliance with Spain and the Holy Roman Empire to quell the French nation, hopefully this time, once and for all. Yet English power across the continent was waning. For Wolsey, this was another task well within his remit and one that would skyrocket his value. In 1518, Wolsey was made a papal legate. He organised the Treaty of London, but his other remaining task was to become a mediator for Europe. Wolsey began to organise one of the largest gatherings of leaders from 20 nations to meet at a peace summit. It would now show England to be a very favourable ally. As with all things political, it ended promptly, with all sides showing disdain at the wording. As usual, in this time, chaos intervened. In 1519, Charles V came to the throne as the Holy Roman Emperor, and Francis I was pretty disgusted after he had apparently thrown a king's fortune in hush money at the electorate to elect him. Wolsey once again had to become mediator. It was a world now spiralling out of control. For Wolsey, though, it was just another day at the office. Wolsey once again hit a home run when he organised a meeting between Henry and Francis I. It was to be known as the Field of the Cloth of Gold. His skills in creating such a masterpiece of diplomacy between Henry and Francis was something to be applauded. Although the event included lavish displays and entertainment on a scale not witnessed before, it would be a great opportunity for the two leaders to put aside their previous quarrels and come together in peace and harmony. So both wealth and power were brought to the fore of the event, something that would show the rest of Europe what they were now competing against. Both France and Spain were now vying for England's allegiance. For Wolsey, this was perfect, as he could now select the ally that best suited his own policies. Under Wolsey's guidance, Europe's chief nations now sought to outlaw war amongst Christian nations, and although diplomacy could sometimes postpone war, it would never prevent wars based on incompatible interests and ambitions. The Treaty of London is often regarded as Wolsey's finest moment, yet it was discarded within a year. Back in 1520, Wolsey had developed links with Charles V at the Field of the Cloth of Gold. In 1521, he signed the secret Treaty of Bruges, again with Charles V. This confirmed that England would unite with Spain in a war against France. That is, if France refused to sign the peace treaty and ignored the Anglo-French Treaty of 1518. It's all very complicated. Although Wolsey's relationship with Rome was also hesitant at best with his links to the papacy, Wolsey succumbed completely to his only true ruler, that was Henry. His Treaty of London was said to be a more subtle addition to Pope Leo's ambitions for European peace. However, in Rome it was seen as nothing more than a way to gain significant powers by England from the papal leadership. This was taken to the nth degree by the treatment of Cardinal Lorenzo Campeggio, who represented the Pope at the Treaty of London, yet he wasn't allowed to cross the Channel and was kept waiting months. This has been described as Wolsey keeping an arm's distance from Rome. When Francis I was captured by Charles V, with a contribution from England, it would be Henry who now thought his opportunity to gain the French crown was nearing, a gain that kings of England from the past had long sought as their right. But the final crushing blow, well, at least to Henry, was when Parliament refused to raise taxes. It would also mark the beginning of the end for Wolsey. The amicable grant, which had been yet another idea of Wolsey's, was met with contempt by most parties. Charles V abandoned England as an ally, and so Wolsey turned his deck of falling cards towards France, but this didn't rest well. Although Francis I's captivity was ongoing, it would be his mother Louise of Savoy that took control and agreed a new treaty with Wolsey. The Treaty of Moore was signed, but the skies were now darkening for an under-pressure chief advisor to Henry.
Further attempted alliances continued, and in 1526 an assembly called the League of Cognac was created. England were not part of this, but Wolsey had taken on another concept in which the only outcome would be more disorder and outrage. It was produced with the hope it could provide some allegiance to Rome, along with the answer to growing concerns about Charles's dominance over Europe. The final act arrived in 1529. The French had made peace with Charles, and to top it they decided to continue their old alliance with Scotland. The facts were there for everyone to see. Henry was blazing mad. He knew now Wolsey had failed him, not only in creating his desired position in Europe, but closer to home there was little to no chance of his marriage to Catherine of Aragon being annulled as he requested. For 2 years Wolsey had tried to secure the annulment, but it was also this state of affairs that dictated how he should proceed on foreign policy. Both failed, and now his master Henry was on the warpath, not with Europe, but with Wolsey.
For Henry, his head was being moved by the new lady on the block. Not the chopping block, but that's a future story. Now, Henry was desperate to remove Catherine as his wife and bring in Anne Boleyn. His real motivation was to have a son and heir, and Catherine, although she'd had children, none survived, and for Henry, this was unthinkable.
Wolsey appealed to Clement for an annulment on 3 fronts. Firstly, he tried to convince the Pope that the dispensation was void, as the marriage clearly disobeyed instructions in the book of Leviticus. Secondly, Wolsey objected to the dispensation on technical grounds, claiming it was incorrectly worded. And finally, thirdly, Wolsey wanted Clement to let the final decision be made in England, which as papal legate he would supervise. In 1528, Clement decided to allow 2 papal legates to decide the outcome in England, Wolsey and Campeggio. Wolsey was confident of the decision, but Campeggio took a long time to arrive, and when he finally did, he delayed proceedings so much that the case had to be suspended in July 1529. This effectively sealed Wolsey's fate.
During his 14 years as Chancellor, Wolsey had more power than any other crown servant in English history. For this he was hated, really hated. The nobility couldn't work out how this son of a butcher had come so far in such time, yet the king continued to protect him. It was as though no matter what Wolsey did, even at the time so the uproar of the king himself, Henry still seemed to believe that his managerial skills and authority would come to the fore as they had in the past. Wolsey was the man with power. He was the one who controlled and calculated every discussion and act before attempting to cement a deal for royal approval. He dominated civil affairs, administration and law, and his foreign policies were notable. But from Henry's standpoint, Wolsey's biggest single mistake was in not getting the divorce he most wanted. You could say it was his cardinal sin.
Rumours persisted that Anne Boleyn and her faction had convinced Henry that Wolsey was deliberately slowing proceedings. As a result, he was arrested in 1529. On this news, the Pope in Rome declared that decisions would now be made there rather than England. Of course, this didn't happen as Henry had demanded. Wolsey by now must have been suffering. He had never been under the stresses he was now receiving, and yet he was still allowed to maintain a position as the Archbishop of York. But ultimately, he was now walking on eggshells, and it was just a matter of time before the call from Henry to attend would be ordered. He left London and travelled to Yorkshire for the first and only time in his career. Upon his arrival at Cawood, he was summoned by Henry Percy, the 6th Earl of Northumberland, accused of treason, and told his next stop would be a return to the capital. Wolsey was clearly distressed, but the journey south began with his companion and personal chaplain, Edmund Bonner. Upon reaching Leicester on the 29th of November 1530, he fell ill and died at the age of 57. It's been said as he lay dying, he spoke these words:
"I see the matter against me how it is framed. But if I had served God as diligently as I have done the king, he would not have given me over in my grey hairs."
His final resting place would not be amongst the leaders of English history. He was buried in Leicester Abbey, now Abbey Park, without a monument.
Cardinal Thomas Wolsey's life can be looked upon as either a total success or a complete failure. I'm guessing the latter is how Henry would have summed him up at the end. Yet he was without doubt a brilliant mind of the times. His audacious climb to heights of power, bringing many subjects in the kingdom to their knees, is truly remarkable. He served his king and country for 20 years. His faith seems to be a little more vague and quite possibly cloaked his real desire of power. He ranks high on achievements, but not always successful, but he established relationships between leaders when, if left to their own devices, would quite possibly never have occurred. His transformation on the way business was to be directed was new and exciting. His diplomatic skills always ensured a compromise to an otherwise stale engagement. He had shaped the king and the country, and his ability to comprehend and focus on issues was second to none. The tax system which helped the poorer in society was one of several changes he made. But Thomas also established the Star Chamber, a judicial system that would lift some of the burdens on procedures within a court of law. Over a 3-year period, he used his powers as papal legate to dissolve 30 decayed monasteries. The income was used to found a grammar school in Ipswich and Cardinal College in Oxford, now known as Christ Church. But all that being said, it wasn't all roses for Wolsey. Much of his plans over time collapsed or became chaotic. He was also becoming very sensitive to growing suspicions amongst the young up-and-coming members of the Privy Council. He attempted many times to disperse them from court, giving them jobs that took them to the continent and far away from Henry. But Wolsey's eventual downfall was from the one man who he'd served diligently for many years, the one man who would always be the top boss, and no one, not even Wolsey, could take that crown. Thank you so much for watching, I really appreciate it. For more amazing stories, join me today and benefit by subscribing. Oh, and check out both the videos coming up on the screen right now. And I'll see you again here soon on the History Roadshow.